We're now going to move to our next session, which is called Bringing Together Digital Therapeutics and mHealth, an Innovation Journey. And this session is prepared together with IBM, and I'm delighted to pass the floor to Andrew Freed from IBM, who is going to be moderating this session.
Just by way of introduction, I am on the board of EHTEL, and I am IBM's healthcare and life sciences industry leader across Europe, and have been in that role. I've been in Europe for 5 years, but the healthcare life sciences role for the last couple of years. So today, what we thought we'd do is go deeper into mobile health and the digital experience, and we thought we'd do that by presenting a case study of an app that has been successfully adopted and is now being rolled out in a number of different locations. So Scott Cunningham will introduce his My Digital Way Health app, which is something that's been introduced in Scotland with the NHS there. So he'll take us through that. And then we're going to take a slightly different line. We're going to go into the policy and standards issues, and Jessica Schull, who's with the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, will take us through that. After that, we've got Julia Hagen, who's with the German Ministry of Health, and we're very lucky to have her join us as well. And she is a director of the Health Innovation Hub, so that should be very good. And then finally, Javier Ferraro is from the European mHealth Hub, and he will talk about his ambitious objectives for mobile use in all parts of Europe. So we've got a great lineup for you. So let me just introduce a couple of things, because I get to see a number of different things in my role, which is a European-wide role, which includes the Middle East and Africa, I should say. So I get to see a number of different things. And my journey's been an interesting journey. I sort of worked for a number of years in Japan, and then before coming to Europe, I led our life sciences industry in China. So my largest client in China was Sinopharm, which has got some publicity recently in terms of rolling out a vaccine for COVID-19. So let me just talk at the top level here about one of the key things that we see in IBM, and that's around the whole issue of change management, how to make these things happen. And it's very good to have ideas, and we can implement, and we can have apps, and we can have all those things, but how to make change happen, both within organizations themselves, but also in the back end, when the back end being where all the pipes are, and making all the IT sort of work together. Always a big challenge. One of the other observations is this period that we've gone through in the last 10 months of COVID-19 is we know that there's a very strong shift to digital. So that's I think that's quite obvious to us all. What also has happened in terms of an observation is we've moved from the back end driven to the front end driven. And I think that's a really important shift that's taken place. And what does that mean? That it means that we're seeing the consumerification of healthcare, and the way people, consumers of health, view and interpret their relationships with healthcare providers. And we've seen that as this dramatic shift to people doing consultations online, but it goes beyond that. It's the making of appointments, it's looking at my medical records, it's moving around with my medical records. And we'll see it continue as we may need to have some type of health pass that says, yes, I've had my COVID vaccine, and the consumer will carry that with them. And as we see that, that's just a dramatic shift. So I, as a consumer, I demanded changes because I saw the way Amazon was doing things, and my relationship with Apple and Google and all these different various apps that are around. This now is very much a front-end driven process of change that we're seeing in the healthcare, and to a certain extent in the life sciences space. So that's a big shift. Natasha from the WHO, in her discussion, talked a bit earlier on today, talked about real-time data. And I hope that Scott will talk us through that and how they're seeing that with his diabetes app. But there's no doubt that the access to data, real-time data, was a major shift that's also taking place. So there are security issues, there are privacy issues, there are a whole host of issues that we need to address. But the point is that data is available, can be available, and let's see about how we all make it happen. And then another point that we had earlier on today, and that was, does digital health have limitations? I think it doesn't, but clearly we're in a regulatory environment, and I think the regulatory environment is extremely important and is ignored at our peril. And I think there's a number of examples around that. And I suppose one very large example is around the use of the tracking apps that, you know, that have tried to be implemented by a number of different countries, some using you know, the Google Apple model and some others different models. But those tracking apps, you know, are they secure, are they not secure, all these sort of things. There's some very interesting things around it. One final comment before I hand it over to my first speaker is around ecosystems, and ecosystems are extremely important. So it's another shift. This is a broader shift that we're seeing within IBM. This is you know, something that we're obviously pushing, but supporting ecosystems is a major part of the way we see industry developing and changing. And working with some of our large clients. I sort of will reference one and only one, and that's with the AstraZeneca BioVenture Hub, which is in Sweden. We have an accelerator that's part of that. It's just a very interesting process in which you work with a large company, working with a whole range of smaller startup companies. How do you enable them and facilitate them to become bigger, to launch apps, to become part of a larger ecosystem? And that gets you to my final point, and that's all about networking. Networking is extremely important. You will have noticed on the invitation, the program, there are LinkedIn you know, links there. Do use them. If I advise anything to younger people or anybody coming up and building a career, network like crazy. It's a very important thing. I've said a couple of final things, but just to talk about the continual transition, we saw yesterday, I think Slack was bought by Salesforce for 38 billion. I don't have any shares in Slack or Salesforce, but just an indicator of the things that are changing. You know, with a company like IBM, we're moving really quite rapidly away from email and trying to use a tool like Slack, which facilitates, you know, communication, broader communication with a larger group. I don't want to sing the praises too much of Slack, but it's part of the transition that we're seeing. So there's a lot of things happening. I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker.